Our second story here for What Is New World Next Week, episode 414 for July 2nd, 2020. As an amazing Media Monarchy member, Girder, says, a double shot of doublethink for your New World Next Week consideration. The first part. BLM protests have not led to spike in coronavirus cases. This coming from the New York Post. Black Lives Matter protests haven't seen coronavirus cases surge in cities since the massive demonstrations began, a study says. The new research, published by the, of course, National Bureau of Economic Research, found no evidence that coronavirus cases jumped in 315 cities in the weeks following the first protests. Researchers determined that protests may have been offset by, let's say an increase in social distancing among those who didn't go to protests. That's okay, let's stick with that. While it is almost certain, this is real research, while it is almost certain that the protests caused a decrease in social distancing behavior among protest attendees, we demonstrate that effect of the protests on the social distancing behavior of the entire population residing in counties with large urban protests was positive. While it is possible that the protests caused an increase in the spread of COVID-19 among those who attended the protests, we demonstrate that the protests had little effect on the spread of COVID-19 for the entire population of the counties with protests during the more than 3 weeks following protest onset, the researchers said. And that is just some amazing mental gymnastics. So that's the first part. Meanwhile, COVID-19 planning considerations. This is a very important thing. The guidance for school re-entry. No child or adolescents should be excluded from school unless required in order to adhere to local public health mandates or because of unique medical needs. James, I've covered endlessly on my morning show, places from the States to all around the world, the ridiculous things they're making little kids do in school, sitting, of course, in little boxes. Again, as the song used to say, little boxes on the hillside. So is it possible to simultaneously accept two mutually contradictory beliefs as correct, James? I think there's a very historical term for that called doublethink, right?
Doublethink, exactly. Yeah, well, in case people believe that was only fiction, you're about to find out, unless you haven't seen it demonstrated already, people already accepting this. So this actually is I think the defining hallmark of the biosecurity paradigm, that the state essentially gets to sanction behavior at this point. They get to say that, yes, you can engage in this type of behavior, but when and if and as it is convenient to the establishment for them to say that that type of behavior shouldn't take place, they can just flip the switch and say, but that's going to cause a new wave. And this is the perfect crystal clear examination. I know we're not breaking new ground here. I'm sure you've heard this reflected on before, but for anyone who hasn't thought of this yet, yes, of course, if the state and the corporations and Nike and McDonald's and everyone else who's jumping on this bandwagon get behind and say, this is good activity, then it's okay. But if it's not approved activity, it will be denigrated and eventually outlawed. And that is the switch that they are trying to install right now in the biosecurity paradigm, which is to say that, that's going to cause a public health crisis, so we can't allow that activity to take place. You want to protest about this? No. You can protest about that, but you can't protest about this, because that type of protest will spread disease. That type of protest won't spread disease. It's, on its face, absolutely ridiculous. But a lot of the population is going to go along with it because they like that. Well, we should protest about this, so okay. They're allowing us, yay! And this is how the state always works, to pit people against each other and divide and conquer and all of that. I mean, again, we're not breaking new ground here. You've heard it before, but it is exceptionally important to keep this at the forefront of your consciousness because they're trying to install a new paradigm, and this is what it is about. It is about the state being able to step in and stop any activity at any time by declaring public health emergency.
James, I finally texted one of my dear, nearly lifelong friends who's a respiratory therapist and a registered nurse, and I'd never actually talked about any of this. We've never had a political relationship. We mostly have only ever talked about Nintendo and Cheap Trick and stuff. I finally texted him the other day to basically say, I was like, dude, what is going on with this? Do you think it's being blown out of proportion? Is it real? Is it this or is it that? He wrote back very succinctly, media is blowing this up. So that's one of my buddies, again, in this field, which, again, you could say, well, that's in West Virginia, so of course it's going to be a smaller case, but microcosm, I think, still works when we extrapolate it out. James, I find the sort of juxtaposition of stories, I think, to be a really, actually powerful tool. I found it really interesting recently to just sort of, and I maybe even, joke about it here in the house, mention one story about, oh gosh, did you hear they're doing this? And then follow it up with one that is actually satire and isn't true. Oh man, did you hear? And the two seem, again, like satire is dead. But again, I think these kind of juxtapositions, putting these stories together, is, I think, a real simple way to kind of illustrate the stories. I think one other update I want to add to this, James, as a semi-related, essentially these same, like, medical martial law geniuses, while all of this is going on, they are still messing things up with CRISPR. A quick update to a story we've been following. James, I double-checked it. We've been talking about it for nearly 5 years here on the show. CRISPR gene editing in human embryos wreaks chromosome mayhem. And one of the quotes from the story says, one of the doctors, if human embryo editing for reproductive purposes or germline editing were spaceflight, the new data are the equivalent of having the rocket explode at the launch pad before takeoff. And again, these are the guys that are going to warp speed some experimental human RNA vaccine. Again, it's insanity.
Little boxes on the hillside, little boxes made of ticky-tacky, little boxes on the hillside, little boxes all the same. There's a pink one and a green one and a blue one and a yellow one, and they're all made out of ticky-tacky and they all look just the same. And the people in the houses all went to the university where they were put in boxes and they came out all the same. And there's doctors and lawyers and business executives, and they're all made out of ticky-tacky and they all look just the same. And they all play on the golf course and drink their martinis dry, and they all have pretty children, and the children go to school, and the children go to summer camp, and then to the university where they are put in boxes and they come out all the same. And the boys go into business and marry and raise a family in boxes made of ticky-tacky, and they all look just the same. There's a pink one and a green one and a blue one and a yellow one, and they're all made out of ticky-tacky and they all look just the same.